Hi, I'm Steve Hargadon. I'm the co-chair of the Library 2.0 conference series, along with Dr. Sandra Hirsch from San Jose State University. We're delighted that you're here. This is the opening keynote panel for Library 2.018, Design Thinking. We're delighted to have Stephen Bell, Rachel Ivy Clarke, Sidsel Bech-Petersen, and Gregory Diaz here with us for this session. We have some great sessions today. This starting session will last an hour. Thanks to the School of Information at San Jose State University for their founding partner and sponsorship of the conference. This is a chance for those of you who are participating live to indicate your location. Look to the left of the map. You're going to look for the star icon. You click on that icon and then click it again and then go click on the map and you can place yourself on the map. Some of you know exactly what to do. You can also put a note in the chat. Tell us where you're located, the time, the temperature. Lovely to see New Zealand and Australia. Looks like Hawaii or somewhere in the Pacific, Alaska, lots of North America. Keep that coming in the chat while I move the slide forward here. So I'm going to turn some time over now to Dr. Hirsch.
Thank you, Steve, and welcome everyone to our Library 2.018 Design Thinking Conference. We're really excited to be hosting this conference and being a co-chair, co-sponsor of this important ongoing conference event at San Jose State University. Our School of Information has really enjoyed having the opportunity to bring people together to talk about important issues that affect information professionals around the world. And one of the big issues today, or one of the opportunities, is to delve more deeply into understanding design thinking and how that can be used and applied in our library and information settings. So I'm thrilled that we have been working very closely with Stephen Bell, who is an expert in design thinking, and he has assembled an outstanding keynote panel for us today, and he'll be introducing them shortly. I did want to just take a quick minute and also mention, just to make sure that you get on your calendars, that we have another exciting conference event on June 7th around blockchain applied, and so we're looking forward to that. And in October, we're planning an event with a date to be determined on social crises in libraries. And so we think that's an important topic for us to be exploring and discussing as well. But with that, I'd like to turn it over back to Steve so that we can move forward with the events of today. And again, welcome everyone. We're looking forward to a great conversation with you.
Thanks, Dr. Hirsch. Okay, now we're going to turn the time over to Stephen Bell. Please feel free to put questions in the chat. They may not interrupt the presentation to answer the questions at the time, but I'll make a note of them and they can be ready for the presenters at the end of the session. Stephen?
Hi everyone, this is Stephen. Thanks so much for joining us today, and thanks to Sandy and Steve for organizing this and giving me the opportunity to help put together the program today. Have been looking forward to it for quite some time. You know, I want to show you something. This is a blog post. I know you can't see it that great, but it's a blog post that I wrote back in September of 2016, and the title of the blog post is Tipping Point for Design Thinking in Libraries. Finally, this is from the blog Designing Better Libraries, where I write about design thinking and user experience. And at the time, there were just some really exciting things happening in the world of design thinking as it applies to libraries. The Design Thinking Toolkit had just come out from IDEO and Chicago Public Library and Doc One Library. There were more web programs, webinars, workshops, conference sessions. So a lot of things happening all at one time. Are we at a tipping point today? We're probably not there just yet, but I think this conference, and with so many of you being here today from around the world and the interest this has generated, is a step forward towards that tipping point. So I'm really excited that you're here today to learn more from our keynote panelists and from our concurrent session speakers, and I hope you'll hang around for the final closing keynote, a shorter keynote where I'll be wrapping things up, summarizing, and hopefully getting you more engaged with design thinking. So do let me say a couple things about our panelists today. I know you had an opportunity to read their biographical statements, but just to say a little bit about each one, again, here are those wonderful folks. And our first speaker is going to be Rachel Ivy Clarke, and she is an assistant professor at the School of Information at Syracuse University. She's an assistant professor there. And I've been working with Rachel for about 2 years now. We've had some exciting projects together, and I think it's safe to say that she's a leading voice in our profession and LIS for examining how we might integrate design into library education. Then we'll hear from Sidsel Bech-Petersen, who is from the amazing Doc 1 Library. I know you've heard a lot about the Doc 1 Library, and they've been doing some exciting work with design thinking there, and again, using design thinking to create the best possible experience for their user community members. And Sidsel is the head of products and co-creation there. And then finally, we'll hear from Greg Diaz. He's the children's librarian at Chicago Public Library, and I think what's particularly exciting about Greg's presentation, and we've worked together as well on a presentation at the past ALA on design thinking, is showing that this isn't something that's just for big research libraries or big public library systems, but he's doing a lot with design thinking at his smaller branch library as part of the Chicago Public, and I think he'll have some exciting things to tell you about how they've been using design thinking to do some really amazing programming for their teens and the children. So I am going to turn things over to Rachel now to get the program started. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks so much, Stephen, and thanks everyone for coming. I've definitely seen some familiar names scroll by in the chat and in the notification, and some new names that I hopefully will get to be familiar over time. So to kick us off, I'm going to talk a little bit briefly about design in general and give an overview of design thinking before Sidsel and Greg will talk about specific examples of applying design thinking in their libraries. So I want to get us started with the bigger picture and talk a little bit just in general about what is design. And design is a pretty loaded word. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It can be a noun. It can be a verb. A design can be a thing, but it can also be a process. And a lot of times people find it a bit mysterious, right? There's some sort of designer, and there's this mysterious black box that they do design. And then a magical, beautiful product occurs at the end. When we think about things like the iPhone and Steve Jobs, and we think, oh, Steve Jobs was this amazing designer, and he came up with this idea, and magically there was this iPhone that was easy to use and had a completely different user experience. But I actually want to push back against that and say that design is not a black box. It just seems like a black box to people who aren't familiar with design. And one of the things that I really appreciate about design thinking is that it's one way to help us break down this black box. Design thinking is a process model, and it's used to harness a lot of those same techniques that are used by designers during that black box process. I want to be clear that design thinking is not necessarily equivalent to design. There's a lot that goes on in the design world. There's a lot of work that designers do. But design thinking is a really clear and straightforward model for getting at that black box information. And that's one of the things that I really love about it and why I'm such a fan of it, because it's just this really basic approach to the fundamentals of design. I love that it's quick and easy. I know I've seen in the chat, some of you are already familiar with the IDEO Design Thinking Toolkit. I love how they have a portion in there for design thinking in a day, right? It's very accessible, the design thinking model. anyone can try it out. Anyone can do it. You don't need specific specialized training. You don't need expensive equipment. You need a little bit of time, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a lot of time. And then, so the other thing I love about design thinking is that I think it is really connected to libraries. Ultimately, at its core, design is about making stuff. Design's about the creation of things, and those can be tangible things like chairs and tables and buildings, or they can be intangible things like systems, processes, policies. But design's about making things that solve problems. And that's really the core of design. So design's about making stuff, really. And what do libraries do? When I think about libraries make stuff. They make all kinds of stuff. And I'm going to talk about some of the stuff that libraries make in the next few slides. So my argument is that libraries are inherently sites of design, because if libraries making stuff and design is making stuff, therefore libraries are design. Some of the typical stuff that we think of libraries making, we really think about design as architecture or furniture or spaces, and we've heard, I've seen a lot of examples of design thinking being used in that area. How are we going to redesign the team space in our library, for example? Another place where we commonly hear the term design used in libraries is things like web design, like, oh, we're going to redesign our website, or we're going to do a mobile design for our website. And then increasingly, I see a lot of references in curriculum and instructional design. I know that Stephen has done some of this with the Blended Librarians and the Designing Better Libraries blog, thinking about instructional design, especially in academic libraries. But I also want to highlight lots of other things that libraries make that we don't necessarily always think about as design. So I was a cataloger when I was a librarian at the Fashion Institute in Los Angeles back in the day. And librarians create cataloging and classification systems. You know, librarians designed the MARC format. It was a librarian that created the Dewey Decimal System. And all of our bibliographic records, all of our authority records, all of those things are created by librarians and are therefore acts of design. I've done some really great work with some colleagues at the University of Washington about envisioning story times as design. Story times and other events are also things that librarians create and are therefore designed. Any sort of policy and procedure, anything where you're deciding how many books patrons can check out, or what happens, do we have fines, do we not have fines? Those are all policies that are designed and created by librarians. Service design, I think, is becoming increasingly visible as an aspect of libraries. I saw a really nice presentation about that at ALA last year. And again, they don't necessarily have to be tangible things. So experiences, right? What are the kinds of experiences that people are having when they come to your library? All of those things, they don't just happen in a vacuum. Those are things that are created by librarians. And the thing that's happening that I see is librarians are creating these things all the time. All of this design work is happening in libraries. That means all librarians are acting as designers, whether or not they know or realize that they're acting as designers. So I prefer, in general, I try at least, to not act without thinking, right? We don't like to have thoughtless acts. And so if we're going to act like designers, then I think we as librarians need to think like designers to inform those actions. So I want to spend a few minutes breaking down the design thinking model. I know some of you are familiar with it, but just in case some of you aren't or want a bit of a refresher, I'm going to do a quick overview. So in general, it's not a linear process, right? It's cyclical, and although I've shown it here as sort of 4 stages in this cyclical process, sometimes it's also broken out into 5. You'll see different versions of it, but in general, these are sort of the major categories. And I also want to emphasize that even though these arrows go in a circle, sometimes these phases can jump around, and you can be bouncing back and forth between them. So it's definitely an iterative process. It's not like a straight line or even a straight circle. But generally, an early stage in the process is to identify exactly what the problem is that you're trying to address. So if design is about making stuff to solve problems, then we have to figure out what those problems are. And often they can be very complex problems that have a lot of different factors going on, a lot of constraints, a lot of different types of people involved. So what we really want to do is identify the core problem. And design thinking is really rooted in empathetic techniques. So beyond sort of your typical user needs assessment where you might look up census data or do a user survey, you really want to try to empathize with the users who are experiencing those problems. There's a lot of different techniques that you can use to do this, and I'm sure that we'll hear about some really good examples of some of these techniques as the day goes on. But things like observation, but very immersive techniques, really putting yourself in those users' shoes, I think is key to identifying the problem and also to ideating solutions. So gathering all sorts of empathetic data and synthesizing it to figure out, what's the real problem here? What's really happening? One of my favorite stages of the design thinking process is the ideation stage. And I like to talk about this as the brainstorming phase where there's no bad ideas. And I think that's been a challenge for many of us in librarianship, right? Where it's, you go to a meeting and everyone says, well, we can't do that. We tried that before and it didn't work. We've always done it this way, right? Is kind of the typical library phrase. There's no bad ideas in the ideation phase. It's important to get all of those ideas out there. Because once you put an idea out there, someone else might be able to take that idea and tweak it, or it might inspire them for another idea. So really emphasizing in this stage quantity, not quality, and really generating just as many different ideas as you can. Next, you want to create some of those ideas. You want to manifest them into that stuff that we're designing. You might have heard about this referred to as the prototyping phase. And for all of these phases, I've used a lot of different terms that I've seen in different manifestations or models of the design thinking cycle. So you might hear it called build or create, develop, implement. But the key in this phase is that you're not going to sink all of your time, all of your resources, and all of your effort into one idea. You're going to try some different ideas, and you're going to try them kind of loose and fast. You might make a prototype of your new website design, but you're not going to put it all in HTML and put it on the web yet. You're just going to maybe draw some pictures of it or do a mock-up in something like PowerPoint and let people work through it. The idea is that they're quick and they're easy and they're disposable. So you haven't sunk a lot of time into a solution only to get feedback from people because you're going to test it with your users and get their feedback and find out that it's not really solving that problem that you identified. So leading into that, obviously there's an evaluation phase where you are going to get feedback from people. You're going to assess what kind of designs you had. And this can be a formal assessment, but I'm also really supportive of just reflection, right? You showed your prototype of this website redesign to some users, and maybe you got some very different feedback than you were expecting. Maybe you really thought it was going to be easy for people to find the search button and to find the articles and the databases they were looking for, and it turns out that they were really distracted by something else that was part of your drawing. Sometimes the people that are using it can't always tell you why they're doing what they're doing, but you know about that design, you know about that prototype, and you can reflect on it and say, what's going on here? What do I think is happening? And some of that reflection might even lead you to rethink, going back to that first stage of the problem identification, were we really solving the problem? Were we solving a different problem? Or maybe we didn't identify the problem as correctly or as in a nuanced way as we needed to begin with. And therefore, we sort of start this whole cycle again where this assessment and reflection, we can use it to identify new problems and to generate new ideas. So like I mentioned, I know we're going to hear some great examples in this keynote from Chicago Public and from Aarhus. I know there are many more. I was reading over the people who are going to present later on and super excited to hear about some of those talks. So I'm not going to go into examples from them. I'm going to let them talk about their experiences and their projects. But I do want to wrap up by just highlighting what design thinking offers. In addition to my argument that we are all designers, I still think design thinking offers some incredible benefits. I think one of the most important and useful things about design thinking is the emphasis on empathy, that we're not just, again, gathering some sort of cold, remote, and distant data on our users, that we're really putting ourselves in their shoes. And you know, I've been a librarian for a number of years, and I've used a number of libraries, and I still go into a lot of libraries, and I still encounter a lot of user experience problems that frustrate me. And I try to take that back and give feedback to those libraries and say, here's what it's like to be in my shoes as a user, and I'm an expert user, right? I'm a librarian. I know how to search databases. I know my call numbers. I know theoretically how to find things. So if I'm an expert user and I'm having problems, imagine, you know, a first-year undergraduate coming to the library who doesn't have that expertise. So really offering that idea of empathy. I think design thinking really offers power in innovation. And again, that idea of getting rid of the mentality of we've always done it this way, or dismissive ideas before we've tried them. The whole, oh, we tried that last year and it won't work. Maybe when you tried it last year, it was a different context. Maybe there were different resources. Maybe there were different patrons. So always being innovative, always being responsive to change, and always being open to new ideas that might not have come to mind before. I also think design thinking is really powerful in terms of encouraging diversity. It's really important to have diverse teams ideating, coming up with these different ideas. You know, one person can only come up with so much. But even just have two people riffing ideas off of one another, and you can gain an exponentially larger number of ideas. And it also, because of the emphasis on empathy, I think it can help us understand and serve a more diverse group of users and a diverse group of perspectives. Another thing that I value about design thinking is that it really lets us get back to the core values of librarianship. So again, things like diversity, things like lifelong learning, things like intellectual freedom and democracy. When we start thinking about, you know, what are the problems and identifying the problems and really thinking about how to create solutions, it can let us harness some of those values and make sure that they're instantiated in our stuff, in the stuff that we're making, as opposed to just going along making things willy-nilly and not thinking about this in a purposeful way. And then ultimately, because design sets out to solve problems, if we have better problem solving, then I think we have more satisfied patrons. If we have more satisfied patrons, ideally we can get more support for libraries everywhere. So just to wrap up, you know, how can you learn to use design thinking? I haven't been able to keep up with all of the chat that's been scrolling, but I've seen some of it go by. Just a couple of resources. Many of you know about the IDEO Toolkit. There's also online courses from the D School, the design school at Stanford. Other places, look for workshops and professional development sessions, just like this one, just like the one that's going on now. A lot of conferences are starting to pick up and have hands-on workshops. My colleague Liz Mills and I are going to do one at ALA this summer. So if you're going to be at ALA, please come and join us. I have information on my last slide about that. Any sort of deeper dive, if you're interested in getting more in-depth into design thinking or other aspects of design, formal coursework starting to appear. Some MLIS programs are offering classes in design thinking. I know Stephen taught one for San Jose last year, and a couple other schools are starting to offer that. I'm working on an IMLS-funded grant right now investigating how to integrate design and design thinking topics into MLIS coursework. And there are lots and lots of readings and resources available out there. I gave a handout to Steve to post on the website with some recommended resources and readings. So thanks everyone for listening. I'm really excited to hear Sidsel and Greg talk more in depth about their examples of design thinking. And here is the session at ALA, Monday, June 25th, a library for everyone, community-centered design to promote inclusive librarianship. We're going to do some fun, hands-on design activities there, if you can join us.
Great. So I don't know, Stephen, if you wanted to jump in, but we're right at the right timing moment. So can I turn it over to Sidsel?
Yeah, please go ahead. Let's keep going with these great presentations. But thanks, Rachel, for doing a fabulous job of getting us started and giving us that overview of design thinking. I really liked how you connected it with the core values of our profession.
Sidsel, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Hello, everyone. This is Aarhus calling. Thank you so much for inviting us to be part of this session, and it's so fantastic to see so many people joining. So hello, everyone. I'm calling from Aarhus, from Denmark, where it's late at night. I'm going to tell you something about design thinking in action and how we have been using it to transform the old main library into Doc 1. And Doc 1 is the new main library in Aarhus. You can see it here on the slide. We opened 2.5 years ago. Just to give you a little idea about where I'm sitting, I'm in Denmark. As I told you, in Aarhus, that is the second largest city in Denmark. Denmark is at the northern part of Europe. In Aarhus, we have 350,000 inhabitants. We have one main library and then 18 branches. So when it was decided about 15 years ago that we were to build a whole new main library in Aarhus, it was a vision right from the start that this new library should be a library for people and not for books. So we knew that user-driven innovation and some kind of user involvement would play a big part of developing this new library. We also knew that in order to do this and to create a library for people, we knew that we had to change our mindset. So we had to go from the library being our space to being the user space. We had to go from being a well-informed place to be a more experimental space at the library with more creativity and with more open innovation. We also knew that we had to fail faster. We had to do a lot of prototyping and testing out in order to find out how to create this new library. And we knew that design thinking or human-centered design or participatory design would become the foundation for this process of creating a new library. So Rachel just told you a lot about what design thinking is and about the process. And overall, for us, design thinking is very much about accelerating innovation, create better solutions, and it's about being very human-centered and always putting the people first. Always looking at the user's problems first and not the library's problems. And in order to do that, we want to know more about the users. We want to listen to what they say. We want to do interviews. We also want to look at what they do. So we do a lot of observations and stuff like that. And we also try to dig a little bit deeper to find out what are the users thinking and what are they also feeling in order to get some inspiration for what the library could do for them. For us, design thinking is also about bringing yourself into a creative process that doesn't only exist in your own head. So it's also about bringing the process out of your head and design together with the users and partners and other stakeholders in the city. So I just want to give you some examples of how the design thinking process could look like in action and how it looks when we design new library services and what it looked like when we designed the new main library. So at the first part of the process,
Hey, can you move your mic just a little bit closer to your mouth? there are
Yes.
people who are saying it's just a little bit hard to understand.
Okay,
if you
sorry.
Perfect.
Sorry about that. Better?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. So at the beginning of the process where you want to go out and learn something about the users and empathize, we often go out and do interviews in the user's own home. So we go to their home and we do an interview for about an hour, and after that we ask them to show us around to see how are they living, what are they interested in. For example, this guy is actually a non-user because he has his own library, so he's telling something about how he will find inspiration for what to read. This is another family that we visited to learn something about what the families in Aarhus do together. We also asked them to show us some of the technologies they use to learn something about how they are using technology. We also often ask them to take a look at some of the ideas we have for new library services, to learn and get some feedback from them for what about what they think about our ideas. After going out and learning something about the users' problems and find inspiration in outside the library, we then go back and do some prototyping. This is a picture of some early prototyping where we just have made a sketch, and then we take it to the library space to get some early feedback from the library users. So that's doing design thinking. A library space is really, and the library is a good space for design thinking because we have the users right there in our spaces, and they would really want to give us some feedback and input. So it's very easy to test your prototypes. So that is what we're doing here. For the process of creating the new main library, this is actually a picture from the old main library where we established a space. We called it a transformation lab. So this was a space where we did prototypes for the new library over a period of, I think it was 10 years. So we were testing out all kinds of different new services. This is a new information desk, so we did some service design around that. So this was a way of inviting the users to be a part of our innovation process, to show them that this library is changing and we want you to be a part of it. This is some other prototypes we did in that space, testing out how the library could disseminate news in new ways, and disseminate music in new ways, test out new technologies. This is a technology where kids can listen to reviews from other kids in the physical books. We tested out interactive floors many years ago to find out how can we build technology into the physical library. We also did some very analog prototyping with kids. For example, here they built prototypes of the new main library, and this was a chance for us to learn more about their dreams and what they wish for and what kind of needs they have. We also try to remember to look up and look out. So we do lots of prototyping in the library space, of course, but we also go out. We have this little mobile library unit that go out to shopping centers, events around the city, to get in touch with users and to learn more about the citizens in Aarhus. Once you also had this camper going out to get into a dialogue with young people. And this is a container. This is also from the process of creating the new main library, where we wanted to create the visual or the logo for Doc 1. So instead of sitting in an office, the graphic designer was sitting in this container right at the center of the city, and all the citizens could stop by and give input his work.
You're so thoughtfully quiet, but you faded again. Can we get you to bring that mic a little bit closer?
Oh, I'm actually holding it right directly almost to my mouth.
Oh, sorry.
But so I'm doing the best I can here, but yeah, I'll try to get it even closer. Okay?
Perfect, thank you.
Can you hear me? Perfect, okay. So this has been the way we have been working. We have spent a lot of time on learning these new methods of doing user involvement and doing design thinking, and most of the methods is wrapped up in the toolkit that we did with the IDEO and Chicago Public Libraries. And we're still working with the Chicago Public Libraries to spread the toolkit, and it's actually out now in, I think it's 12 different languages, so it's really spreading all around the world, and it's so fantastic to hear so many libraries that are using this approach. And if any of you are using it, we would really be interested in hearing more from you to learn more about how other libraries are using it. So that was a little bit about our process and how design thinking has been a new mindset and lots of new methods for us to create the new library in Aarhus. But we think that that's one way of thinking about design thinking. We also like to think about design thinking as a new library service. So we also like to think of the library as an innovation space for the public. So the library should also be a space where the citizens can innovate. So we think that lots of the tools that we have been using and lots of the tools in the toolkit could also be something that the library could offer to the citizens. So why not have, for example, creativity as a library service for the citizen here? We also have been running some training sessions where we invite the citizens to come to the library and learn about design thinking so that they can use it for whatever purpose they have. This is also giving the citizen new tools, all the maker stuff and 3D printers, and showing the users how they can use the designer's toolbox. For example, being very visual, that's another tool that we have been using a lot, drawing instead of writing everything. And then in this way, help the users find a way to solve the problems that they have. So we think in that way design thinking can also be a service that the libraries offer to their citizens. So at the end here, some of the lessons learned for us. Design thinking has been a way for us to rethink and focus our innovation work. We like to see the library as an ongoing prototype, so the library as a space where we actually never stop prototyping things with the users. Using design thinking for us has also been a way to change the culture and the mindset in the organization. And we have seen that that's quite important to, if you want to change your library, you have to also change the organization culture and the mindset. And then also this thing about looking at design thinking as a service that the library can provide in order to be an innovation hub for the local community, then design thinking could be something that we offer to the public. So we encourage everyone to take a leap. So we have seen and we have known user experience design for many years. In this kind of process, you put the user at the center of the process, but we are still the designers. We design for the public and for the citizens. But we encourage you to take a leap and think about how design thinking could also be an opportunity to do more co-creation at the library. because it's a format that allows users and partners, stakeholders, to all be contributors in this, and also decision makers in a design process. So design thinking as a way that library could design with users instead of just for the users. And with those words, you could all find all the material from the toolkit on design thinking for libraries, and we would also like you to take a look at the Facebook page and join it to help. At this Facebook page, we try to inspire libraries to do design thinking and share methods, and also invite others to give us their examples of how they have been using design thinking. So thank you very much, and sorry about the sound.
No, you did great, and thanks for letting me interrupt you. Stephen, did you want to segue?
Yeah, thanks, Sidsel, for giving us some very practical examples of how you implement and use design thinking at the amazing Doc 1 library. We had quite a few comments in the chat from people saying they had been there and it was amazing, and I think we all need to get there at some point. But especially I like your point in closing about how design thinking, if nothing else, can be an amazing way to engage staff members in a change process in a way that gets them empowered about the change that's going to be taking place, and to then have a role in making it happen through this design process. And I think we'll hear more of that in some of the concurrent sessions. So thanks for making that point. And you came through pretty loud and clear for most of us, so no need to apologize. Let's move ahead to Greg.
Okay, hello everyone. So my name is Greg Diaz. I'm a children's librarian with CPL, and I'm going to take you through what CPL has been doing. So we're talking about design thinking right now at a local level. So this is about how you can take design thinking and scale it down to the appropriate level for your community. So we're going to discuss the Chicago Public Libraries design process, how to use design thinking to improve user experience, and how to get a program to the appropriate scale. Throughout, I'll be discussing CPL projects that use this methodology, including some stories and some pitfalls that we've encountered along the way. Okay. All right, so design thinking can sometimes seem daunting because you can come through with really big, complex, questions that you need to solve. But in our experience, they often boil down to a common problem. So here are just a couple of common problems that we encountered, or we did design thinking projects to address. The one I worked on was a design team focused on developing programming that would appeal to millennials, specifically millennial gamers. A second one was a design team explored how patrons discovered and interacted with special collections. So these are not hugely complicated ideas, at least on the surface level, but we learned a lot just with developing these basic ideas. And I would like to point out that the very first one that you see there, the design team focusing on appealing to millennials, in the process of that design process, we learned that we really shouldn't target age groups so much. We should actually start aiming at behaviors. So we kind of put the cart before the horse, and I'll talk about how that manifested when we actually got to the actual project. So when you're doing one of these design projects, the first thing you have to do is get to know your audience. So Sidsel covered this a bit, but so we often do interviews with users and non-users. Now, I saw a couple of questions about how to get non-users, and there were some great answers to it. Oftentimes, our network of users would connect us to people, because everyone knows somebody who doesn't use the library. Sometimes you can go out into a community and get non-users, and sometimes when you do analogous experiences, like visiting similar places, you can speak to folks there, and they might not be library users. So you can go ahead and get your non-users there. Additionally, we would talk to experts. So in my case, working on the CPL Games team, we talked to game shop owners. We talked to people who did RPG nights. We did talk to places that did community game nights. We spoke with people in the community who have very great experience working with this. And so One last note here is that we kind of focused our projects, and this has kind of been a very essential element of what we do. Going very broad isn't always very helpful. You can get a lot of data very quickly, and sometimes it can muddy the water. So we very much targeted the folks we worked with. So you can see here just a couple of the organizations we worked with. We worked with the Chicago Nerd Social Club, which is a group that puts together meetups for various nerd-themed activities, including games. We worked with an entrepreneur who's building a game cafe in the city. We've worked with a group called the Night Ministry, which appeals to individuals who are suffering setbacks, but they developed a game to sort of build empathy between people who don't suffer those kind of setbacks and people who do. It's a very interesting project that deserves its own presentation, but it's just how to build empathy in that regard. So we do all of these interactions to build empathy in one way or another, either hearing stories or visually seeing spaces and seeing how patrons interact with that space, or just seeing how patrons develop relationships with each other inside that sort of space. And so once we put all that together, we develop some learnings. Now, I'm actually going to focus in really quickly on a couple of very key learnings that I learned in my project. So again, we were targeting millennial gamers, and we learned 4 things. And all of them are best summed up by our 4th point here, but I'll go over them really quickly. So the first is millennial gamers lack time. Millennials are often part of the gig economy. They don't have as much freedom of time as they'd like to, pursue social activities. Millennial gamers also reject barriers to entry or exit. That means they don't want to experience any sort of barrier that prevents them from engaging with someone. They also don't like personal barriers that keep people away from each other. And millennial gamers prefer dialogue to lecture. So that means that they want to have a communication with folks. All of this, however, came up on one of our really serendipitous learnings, which is this 4th point. Millennial gamers want a genuine experience. When my group heard that phrase, we were interviewing someone, and we thought, wow, that's really wacky. That doesn't seem like anything. It was kind of a funny turn of phrase. But when we boiled everything down that we'd been hearing about people not having time, about people not wanting barriers, and about people wanting to engage, we realized that those were all learnings that were emblematic of that genuine experience. And so that sort of silly point became foundational to the project that went forward and actually helped us develop something very serious and very successful. So really quickly, I just want to talk about where that led us when we started thinking about the genuine versus the artificial. And for me, there's nothing more artificial than sitting and getting your license at the DMV. When you're sitting in a place and you don't have a lot to do and there's no mobility, there's a pressure to be there versus a welcoming atmosphere. There's barriers versus your ability to move and participate how you'd like. There are people who are forcing or selling you things rather than engaging with you. And there are individuals who you're tackling things that are task-oriented as opposed to something that you are personally interested. So it's a burden rather than something that you want to engage with. And so once we unpack that from that silly phrase, genuine experience, we realized that we were onto something. So that just goes to show that this design process can be extremely serendipitous. None of us would have gone in thinking that this would be an essential thing, but it's turned into something that's really founded the games team's work going forward. So one thing to note is conflict is a design space, and this is something that we learned early on. When you have 2 needs that appear to be at odds, this is a really great place to start designing. So for the CPL Games team, this is not our exact phrase, but what we came up with was something along the lines of millennial gamers want a genuine experience, but they lack time and the opportunity to bypass barriers. We also work with another group called Chicago Digital Learn. This is not a design thinking project. This is just an initiative that the CPL has put out. And so this is an initiative that provides patrons with a chance to self-directedly learn basic computer skills. So we can say that patrons want to learn computer skills but are limited to library hours to learn these skills. Is there a way that we can go ahead and address those? And so when we find this space of conflict, we find a space where we can design a solution. So moving forward, Sidsel will touch on this as well, but so we ask a particular type of question during this phase, the how might we question. So after you review your data and identify design potential, the project begins to get focused through this how might we question. So for the special collections project that we talked about earlier, the question was, how might we build relationships between special collections and CPL staff in order to demystify archival holdings and policies? If any of you are in special collections that's attached to a public library, you know that can be a bit of a challenge sometimes. You know, special collections can seem exotic and strange, or just, you know, not as relatable as materials that are out in stacks. So this design team developed this how might we question to help them focus their project and really get them get their collections out into patrons' hands and also make CPL staff more familiar with it. So once you have those how might we questions and you sort of know the thing you want to tackle, we develop some insights. I'm not going to go into those because I think that's been covered a bit earlier. But the next phase really intrigues me, and that is taking your insights. So in our case, again, it was that in the games team's case, we wanted to provide an experience that you know, would tackle openness and remove barriers and allow gamers to interact freely. So we developed a lo-fi prototype. You can see the special collections prototype on one side, which is a traveling exhibit box that contained duplicates of special collections material that could be put up in the library. On the other side, you can see an ad in a newspaper that we mocked up. And this was an ad for something called Games on the Go. Games on the Go would take a project and would take a collection of games and bring them out into a street festival. And then people could go ahead and play with those games as they would like. Now, we didn't exactly have a format at that point, but we knew we wanted to take the games and interact with people in a space where they'd be comfortable, a space where they could have food, a space where they where they didn't have to be quiet, a space where they could really engage with people in a social manner without having the pressure of reputedly quiet library space. And so we developed these prototypes, and then we take them for administrative review. Now, this doesn't sound super exciting, but it's actually very important. Administrative review does three major things. The first is that, so when you're making your prototypes are lo-fi. You're not spending a ton of time developing them. You're not, you know, this isn't terribly elaborate. This can be as simple as making an ad and showing it to someone and giving them the gist. But it's important that you create something and hand it to someone so they can interact with it physically and develop that empathy with your vision. The next step is that the next reason that you do this is that it gets you to an appropriate scale. And I can't emphasize this enough. Failing small is a lot better than failing big. So if you develop a prototype and the people who are reviewing it don't interact with it or don't like it very much, if you've used 50 cents in cups and, you know, a diagram of a room, you have been far more effective with your resources than if you mocked up something that took months of time to do. So you can, you know, get your idea out there and test it out in a safer way. So your administrative review is sort of your first way of testing that out. And then finally, your administrators can ensure your project meets organizational needs. So if your administrators are like, hey, this doesn't look like it's going to cost us very much, it looks like it's informed by something, let's go ahead and tailor this so it fits our needs and fits our mission, that can just work very well for selling the project and bringing it to fruition, as well as keeping it in line with what your library wants to achieve. So the next step that we in CPL take is what we call mini pilot. So this is bringing that pilot, that project into existence in a limited fashion. What you see here is the first iteration of games on the go. And so here you see somebody playing a giant block builder game. This was completely unexpected. We had our games tent out, we had our giant block builder, and there were people who were playing competitively against each other, and we went from a crowd of, like 20, 30 people around our table to a crowd of hundreds that were just watching this display of skill, engaging with us, and really getting involved with what we were doing. So this was an amazing experience. We hadn't expected that, but it's because we got it because we rolled back barriers. I should note that a few tents down from us, there was another person with another block builder game. It was a mobile phone carrier, and they were saying, hey, play our block builder, and then we'll sign you up for a phone. And that really didn't get a lot of play because the people that we were working with don't like to be sold to. The people we're working with don't like barriers to entry. They don't like things that are contingent. It creates a non-genuine experience. So just going to move on here in the interest of time. So I'm going to discuss really briefly what we've done in the years since. CPL Games on the Go is entering its 4th year and has actually developed into a committee that hosts events year-round, including International Games Day and then other events peppered throughout the year. We also hold regular design thinking boot camps to develop new projects. And so we've expanded Chicago Digital Learn, for example, to the basics. So you had people who wanted to learn computer skills. And that's become, hey, now that you know the basics of a computer skill, why don't we go ahead and offer you more complex self-guided instructions? In addition, I work in a primarily Hispanic branch, and it didn't really work very well, the translations that were there initially. So it's expanded into many different languages, and the feedback on those translations were provided by some of our branch staff who said this is the translation that might work best. And now we're currently developing cohorts that are developing ways to engage with older adults and also focusing on craft programs. All right, folks, so if you want to get in contact with me, here's my information, and thanks a lot for your time.
Stephen, in the interest of time, we probably need to have you just wrap us up.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks, Greg, Sidsel, and Rachel for your amazing presentations. They generated lots of exciting conversation on both a chat and Twitter. And yeah, we should be moving along. There's a lot of great concurrent sessions coming up, but I hope as a result of this, everyone has a good basis, a good foundation for understanding design thinking and why this is becoming more attractive to our library community, because it can be so important for helping us make better programs and services and resources to, again, get back to making it a better user experience all around for the community. So get into those concurrent sessions and try to hang around. We didn't get to your questions, and I'm sorry about that, but hopefully we can have more conversation, discussion, and questions in our wrap-up session after the concurrent sessions. Thanks, everyone, and look forward to talking to you later.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Rachel, Sidsel, and Greg. Terrific job. Okay, we're now going to close the room out and encourage you to move on to the next set of sessions. Thanks so much for being here. Hope you have a great conference. Bye now.